On the donor side of the equation, the primary drivers are strategic and geopolitical influence, in addition to shoring up potential trading partners. Conversely, economic, social, and political stability and growth are the motivations on the recipient side. One could also conjecture that the expectations and outcome of the respective leaders are also different. Donor leadership function within a framework of quantifiable projects with anticipated outcomes or results, incorporating fixed start and completion timeframes, coupled with transparent and accountable indexes which will be reported to appropriate authorities and taxpayers. Recipient leadership, on the other hand, desire impactful, sustained programs which will serve as the foundation of stability and a potential springboard towards prosperity. Determining commonality between these leadership drivers has always been a challenge, in my opinion. The second ingredient of the partner dynamism model, ownership, could serve as a major mitigating factor in the pursuit of a singular purpose for both leaderships. While many of the problems which plague the African continent today have their roots in exogenous factors, those problems have been exacerbated by Africans themselves through poor governance, corruption, tribalism, to name a few. Coming to grips with the fact requires the courage to take full responsibility and ownership of the problems and challenges, coupled with an indefatigable resolve to solve them. Until African leaders and institutions understand that regardless of their origin, African problems can only be resolved by Africans, those problems will linger in perpetuity and continue to manifest themselves in mediocrity, poor governance, tyranny, impunity, and abuses. Conversely, our selected partners must embrace the concept as well as the practical approaches that lead to sustained growth, development, and ultimately self-reliance within African nations. Under the partner dynamism model, within the constructs of ownership and leadership framework, donors and recipient stakeholders have a fundamental responsibility to initiate certain actions that will ensure an environment for effective, sustained, and eventual independent growth and development. First and foremost among these actions is creating stability in terms of human security, political freedom, and social justice. Such an environment would inevitably lead to predictability, a critical element in the exercise of investment decisions and geopolitical strategic participation. For you see, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, be they potential bilateral or multilateral assistance partners, NGO or private investors, partners in development all seek predictable outcomes. Thus, the leadership on the recipient side must foster principles and institutions of governance that will ensure peace and stability, the protection of rights, equal access by all to the amenities and benefits of government. For example, the rule of law and justice system that is fair, equitable, and expeditious is absolutely imperative. Partners in development need the assurance of guaranteed due process within a legal framework in order to be fully committed to the task at hand. This requires steadfast political will and courage by the leadership of African and developing nations. Constant reform for the better must become the modus operandi of African and developing nations. We must enter into a new phase of continuous reformation with an objective of attaining and maintaining best practices in all aspects of our political, social, and economic existence. We must at all times henceforth be engaged in reforming our practices, our laws, our institutions, and even our behaviors, whether they are dealing with issues of land, or issues of corruption. Reforms must take on a homegrown approach that incorporates our own cultural mores and values. Just because a model worked in post-World War II Germany does not mean it will work in the partner dynamism model. This is where the sensitivity and foresight on the part of the donor leadership is indispensable. By enhancing the insights and sensitivity of the recipients, by embracing, the insights and sensitivities of recipients, donors could affect cost savings and bring the project to conclusion more expeditiously and with mutually desired results. Most importantly, both donors and recipients should agree that the ultimate objective is to create aid-free independence and interdependent trade. Arguably, this may not be the objective of those who seek to perpetuate dependency as a means of political manipulation and economic exploitation. In my opinion, such dependency contributes to global insecurity and serves no good purpose. I am of the firm conviction that governments should be in one business and one business alone, the business of governance. Too many African and developing governments are involved in a multiplicity of activities within their nations which either detract from their ability to govern effectively or create hurdles to development. For example, in my country of Liberia, the government is directly involved or has direct stake in banking, housing, cement production, transportation, telecommunications, produce marketing, port management, and a wide array of other enterprises. Given that we barely have sufficient capacity for the important task of governing, this is mind-boggling, and the government has taken action to rectify this problem. The partner dynamism model advocates directing aids toward creating the environment for direct private sector involvement in development. Recipient governments must divest themselves of those areas that would more effectively and efficiently be managed by the private sector. Donors must support rapid private sector participation by fostering entrepreneurial ventures, especially among nationals within recipient countries. It is no secret that aid is band-aid, pardon the pun, while private sector initiatives are more sustainable. Moreover, private sector initiative is the trigger for wealth creation, which is the ultimate goal of the partner dynamism model. The creation of economic wealth will lead to a vibrant and important middle class, which will become the juggernaut of sustained social and political change in Africa and the developing world. One of the most common ailments in Africa is the huge disparity between a very small core of haves versus a nearly innumerable mass of have-nots. This gap will only be narrowed through the appropriate shift of a significant portion of the have-nots into a middle class. The bottom line is, when you create wealth by establishing a middle class, this could become so focused on maintaining and growing that wealth that they are actively vested in the national stability, thus preventing violent changes that are fueled by poverty and disenfranchisement. Direct involvement by the private sector in the infrastructure development of Africa and the developing world, using creative approaches, is a surefire way to aid free independence. The cooperation of national and external private sector players in building rail networks, road networks, energy systems, telecommunication systems, etc., not only fuels wealth creation, but puts people to work and fosters the valuable transfer of technology, knowledge, and capacity. The importance of education cannot be overemphasized within this new paradigm of aid in Africa and the developing world. First, we must revisit the priority of aid in education in Africa and the developing world. Traditionally, aid for education has been prioritized towards early and primary education. While admittedly this is a good long-term investment, there is always the pressing demand for young professionals within the African workforce. This implies that donors should consider shifting some portion of the valuable resources to institutions of higher learning that will then be able to meet these immediate demands. It also means creating and expanding collaborative research efforts between donor and recipient institutions of higher education, as research is the springboard to development. For example, Africa can be considered a vast research laboratory in the area of agriculture, engineering, ecology, environmental science, psychology, sociology, anthropology, and much more. Collaborative efforts between researchers in higher education from both donor and recipient countries would ultimately lead to significant mutual benefits, including food security, more efficient energy grids, superior transportation networks, superior communication networks, more viable and useful pharmaceuticals, among others. Such collaboration will also provide access to the technology that Africa and the developing world so desperately needs for its continued development. After all, let's face the facts. Development is impossible without technology. Consideration must also be given to tapping into the vast human resource base of the diaspora of recipient countries. We must find means to creatively exploit the African diaspora. In this way, not only will they contribute financially to the development of their respective countries, they will be drawn home again to actively contribute to the rebirth of their continent. In conclusion, there is one factor which the partner dynamism model incorporates. That is the regional aspect of aid. Some consideration to be given to rationalization of aid within regions. For example, donors and recipient stakeholders should consider pooling aid funds for the creation of trans-regional highways as opposed to highways limited by national borders. Such rationalization could yield significant economies of scale and would be an impetus for regional and South-South trade, which is sorely lacking on the African continent. It is my hope and desire that this model of partner dynamism will begin to spur the creation of the new paradigm leading to aid-free independence and trade-based interdependence. Thank you for your time and attention and the opportunity to learn and grow with you.
Did we deliver what we promised? Yes, thank you. He does bring the wisdom of the past with the energy for the future. And if all of you have been able to really consider yourselves being part of that partnership that he was mentioning, I think we really owe it to ourselves, and not only to Africa, but to development as a whole, to consider his comments very seriously, and as the day goes on, to figure out how does the common ground that we are pursuing allow us also to analyze the differences. I think one of the most exquisite part of the presentation is really to be able to go back and look at our pasts, and look at also at the difficulties in which sometimes we want to function in development. And yes, we do have the opportunity to change, and to change for a better good. We're going to now take advantage of the few minutes that we still have available and allow for the audience both to, if you want to make some remarks, but particularly take advantage of our leader and ask some questions of clarifications. As you ask the question, please introduce yourself and the organization you represent. There are 3 microphones throughout, and may I see if there's anyone that would like to make a comment or a question? Yes?
My name is Ange Timbo from Africare.
Hello.
I just want to thank Ambassador Barnes for a very brilliant presentation, because you went to the roots of the problem in Africa. You had a very clear and very honest speech. My questions to you, is it possible to have such a speech before the ambassadors, the African ambassadors here in Washington? And then to the extent possible, is it possible for you to make that speech in front of the head of states of Africa?
Thank you for your question. I'm truly flattered. No, but I'm a big proponent of trying to create or build relationships between the diplomatic corps, the African diplomatic corps, and the Washington community, for example, SID-Washington, D.C. In all candor, I'm a tad disappointed that there are not any of my colleagues out of the African diplomatic corps here. But all I need is an invitation. Give me a platform, and I'll say what I believe is my truth. But thank you very much for your kind words.
I think we already have the next program for seats. Thank you for suggesting it. In the back?
Good morning, Ambassador, and thank you for your remarks today. I'm Michael Griffin with Coleman International here locally, and my question is, there are a lot of issues related to providing aid to African nations as they continue to grow. But my question is, how important do you think that security and stabilization to the region are before a number of these programs can be successful?
It's absolutely essential. And if I may be as candid as possible, and if you allow me, I'll take my diplomatic hat off. That's been one of the problems with aid in the past. It's been largely driven by political motivations. Okay, so and when those political motivations become primary, then there is a tendency to ignore the underlying security and human security and peace and stability issues. So again, with partner dynamism, you need to sit at a table as equals. Okay, no one knows the problems of Africa better than Africans. No one knows the problem better of developing worlds than those that live there and lead there, and try to get input from both sides and look at all of these issues. But it's a tough question. It's a tough question and a tough issue, because those that are providing those aid dollars, in addition to, of course, wanting to see and show our partners, they do have this geopolitical strategic interest that is sometimes overrides the underlying security issues that you mentioned. But I believe it's absolutely essential. You must have this groundwork on which you can build a predictable environment to move forward with effective aid and development.
Another comment? Yes, back there.
Good morning. Ambassador Barnes, thank you very much for a very fascinating speech and a challenge to the international development community. My name is Allison Johnson, and I'm here with Northrop Grumman Corporation, and I would like to pose a question in regards to your comments of the role of the private sector in the development process. I was very struck by your observations that if you look across the developing world, private sector development seems to have had a much bigger impact in changing people's lives than necessarily the work of the international development community. And you see that particularly in Asia and the developments across Asia. If you could comment about how the private sector will impact growth in Africa, and whether you see your comments of governance from the government being the primary role and the comment about stabilization being more important in terms of just laying the groundwork for private sector, both foreign and domestic, to really take hold and transform those societies. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Private sector is most successful because they have a motive, okay, and it's many times not political. It's called profit. And profit is fine. And when you're focusing on the profit motive, you drive towards efficiency, which is good. One of the primary factors in Africa with the private sector is the issue of mitigating risk. Now, I give you an example, Liberia, which consider post-conflict, turning the corner, going into development. We are trying very hard to encourage investment in Liberia. But with the absence of a predictable environment, the issue of risk is higher. And the private sectors or corporations assess risk, how risky it is, what's the possibility of getting the returns on my investment and meeting my primary financial indicators. So if you put Liberia over here and Singapore over here and then try to do risk assessment, it's an easy decision. So the whole idea is to try to mitigate the risk. And we have to find creative and innovative ways to do so. One of the things that I know of that the US government did some time ago was at the fall of communism, the fall of the old Soviet Union, the US Congress established 10 enterprise funds and more or less directed to those satellite countries of the former Soviet Union. And what that did was provided a pool of resources that allow American private enterprise to engage those countries. I mean, one of the most successful ones that I know of was Poland. By the use of their enterprise fund, they established their financial services industry, which is very, very successful today. But it was an innovative way to approach mitigating the risk of potential US investors into going into environments like those. But we have to find mechanisms like those. The other very innovative concept that the US has implemented in recent times is the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the Millennium Challenge account, which sits and tries to create an environment that is predictable in Africa and other developing countries, but at the same time reduce risk that will encourage private sector involvement. I hope I answered your question.
We have time for one more brilliant question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Figure that.
I'm sorry. I am sorry.
Okay, yes, do.
Who? Me?
Yes.
Good morning. I'm Marisa Belaustegui-Goitia. I'm a member of the Governing Council at the SID. Mr. Barnes, thank you very much. I particularly enjoyed your concept of Renaissance, since it comes from a very debated field here, maybe literature and a women writer, but it's highly inspiring for economics and development. And what I want to ask you is to go a little bit deeper in that term, in the term Renaissance, because Renaissance asks for not only shifting, but really changing of paradigms. And I come from Latin America, I come from Mexico, and we are really getting into the new constitution of Bolivia, which has this very important concept, which is living well, el buen vivir. So I wanted to ask you about these three groups, is civil society, women, and youth. How do you see civil society, women, and youth, or women and youth? How do you see them engaging in this Renaissance, but from an African perspective, from a paradigm that is also questioning European central way of knowing and of kind of conquering or of empowering? How is Africa dealing with this inspiration of Europe, but also with the tensions that such a challenging concept as Renaissance push us to think too? Thank you.
Thank you. I personally believe in using homegrown approaches or incorporating homegrown approaches in whatever solutions that will be applied to Africa. Africa is a very traditional place. Okay, we have traditions that are thousands of years old that still impact and influence us today. One of those traditions is Africa is perceived as a paternalistic or male-dominated society. But the very truth of the matter is, well-kept secret is, our society really is driven by women. They do, they carry the brunt of our informal sectors. Okay. So as we engage these, because of this wonderful phenomenon called globalization, the world has become a smaller place. And as we engage others, okay, there are those external or exogenous influences that impact how we lead, how we follow, and how we exist. So with the very strong Western concept of women's rights and women's, we've always had that in Africa, but in a different way, in a traditional, different way. I mean, in Liberia, in much of Western Africa, market women are the backbone of our informal economy. They are the one, a large group, pretty large, significant group of illiterate women, okay, who have responsibility for growing or going to the farms and buying produce, washing, storing, bringing them to the marketplace, and selling them in little piles. I'm not talking about anything sophisticated. I'm talking about little piles of peppers and okra and whatnot. But through that activity, they're able to support their family and educate the children. So if that has been the case for thousands of years on our continent, then we need to begin to recognize that as we shift and move into this global environment, we need to empower our women because they bring and continue to bring more value to our own existence. The same is the case with young people. Tradition in Africa is when you're a young person, you should be seen and not heard. Well, of course, that is changing, again, thanks to globalization and the wonderful impact of the World Wide Web. So I guess the bottom line is we have to engage, empower all of these groups and civil society, a lot of faith-based organizations. A great example of that is the conflict in Liberia came to an end after much discussion and talk, and unfortunately a lot of cost, human cost. But one of the key driving factors that brought the crisis to Liberia to an end was the role of women. They just got up and said, we are tired of this. We are tired of having our children, sons kill us and rape us and beat us. So women from all walks of life, all religious and ethnic groups got together and begin to demonstrate peacefully to bring peace. They have power. These groups have power. Leadership in Africa needs to understand that if we are going to go forward in a progressive way and catch up with the rest of the world, we have to empower those groups that have been in the past disenfranchised. I wish I addressed your question properly.
I am so sorry I have to stop. I know that this probably will be one of those activities where we can all have a picnic and continue having this conversation. But as you know, our Madam Chair has had a very precise schedule for today, and I must follow the schedule. So thank you so much for all of you being here, and for also those extra questions that are available. Please find the time to get to know Ambassador Barnes, and maybe in one way or another we can redirect the questions. Please join me in thanking him for his message and his wisdom.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Ambassador Barnes, for a wonderful keynote presentation. Having your comments on the Africa development paradigm really positions us for the day's discussions. We accept with enthusiasm your invitation for closer collaboration with the embassy community, and I